Jesus wept. I'm sure everyone has memorized that verse. You probably just memorized it right now. But do you know the backstory to that? Here's what the timeline looks like. Jesus is notified that his friend Lazarus is dead. He responds with, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God." The purpose of it is for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. The Bible makes this note that Jesus loved Martha and Mary. And Mary is the one who poured that expensive perfume over Jesus' feet and wiped it with her hair. So, but get this. The Bible says, so he heard that he was sick and he stayed for 2 more days. Doesn't that seem odd? After 2 days, Jesus says to his disciples, he says, let's go to Judea where the sisters are. So they travel there, and Martha meets Jesus along the way and says, if you had been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. And Jesus says, your brother will rise. And she says, I know, in the resurrection on the last day, I know he'll rise. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Martha answers yes. Then Mary finds Jesus and says the same thing. If you were here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. Then contained in a few sentences, Jesus displays this act of humanness that is so cool, but is often can be overlooked in the big picture of Lazarus being raised from the dead. Verse 33, it says, therefore Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping. He groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus wept. It's at that moment that Jesus empathizes with their loss. That he realized that the purpose of this whole story, the purpose of all these happenings, Lazarus dying and all this, were to glorify God. And yet and so even the delay, I think it seems like the delay was, as we will read later, that he was dead for 4 days, and they opened the tomb and they're like, it's going to be stinky. It's not going to be pretty. And I think the point is that, my guess is the point is that God is saying, I don't want anyone to think that this could be, oh, well, maybe he wasn't dead. Maybe he's just really sick, or I don't know, who knows what. That Jesus wanted to flex his muscles and say, this is a true rising of the dead. And so, but that delay, this is a true rising of the dead, so that I may be glorified. And yet in that delay of Jesus coming, those 2 days, and then later 4 days by the time he gets to Lazarus, Jesus understands their pain. And if you've ever had significant loss, you know the pain that they went through for those 4 days. That it was gut-wrenching. And I think Jesus right now is like entering into that and feeling that with them and realizing that the cost of having the story be that God is glorified in it ultimately means that it's a struggle. It's been a struggle for his friends. So the Bible continues to show Jesus' level of empathy for the loss these friends have experienced. In 38, it says, then Jesus, groaning in himself, came to the tomb. Which is so interesting, because Jesus isn't doing this like, oh, this display so that he can convince people that he cares. His care is just coming out in his heart and how he's groaning. He's groaning in his spirit. And I think that's just a really beautiful, picture of Jesus, that whether he's in his humanness fully or whether he's in his godness fully, both roles, he has this empathy, this ability to enter into our pain as no one can, and be there for us. And so anyways, the Bible is meant to tell us things. You know, we read the Bible so that it can encourage us or tell us things. And maybe today it's telling you that you're never alone in your pain. Maybe it's telling you that Jesus was weeping alongside you when you got the cancer diagnosis. or when you lost a child, or when you were alone in your marriage, or when you just felt unseen. That let this story, let these words maybe inquire you to ask, or cause you to ask a good Father who loves you, and say, where was he during those times? What's his view of that circumstance that you were in? How does he see it? Because Jesus' delay, his Lazarus' death, and Lazarus' resurrection were all meant to glorify God. There was a divine purpose in it. Maybe there's a divine purpose in your story.